Hi, I'm Mark Loux, Extension Weed Scientist at The Ohio State University. Well, we're in another one of those situations where we're putting out newsletter articles and doing this video on what to do when your burn down's delayed. Last time we did this was 2017, so I don't know if we're in a cycle where we're getting just increasingly wet springs or whatever, but I'm standing in a field right near campus, and this could be pretty typical of what a lot of you might be facing right now. So, this video is about how to adapt your burn down program somewhat to deal with some of this, and keeping in mind that you have a few real driver weeds here. Maristale is going to be a driver weed for what to do with your burn down. Giant ragweed is, if it's developed glyphosate resistance, and then we're actually late enough that we're picking up some water hemp coming up in some fields that have a history of water hemp. So those are three driver weeds for you, keeping in mind they all have, most populations have some glyphosate resistance, and they can have some other types of resistance as well. In a very general sense, kind of a couple things to keep in mind. One is that when you finally get a chance to get in the field, you might consider putting some burn down on your bean ground, then going back and working ground for corn and planting corn, and then coming back and planting beans. And you still have some waiting intervals with 2,4-D, sharpened depending on what you're mixing it with, and some things like that. So if you still have those in your burn down program, keep in mind you need to allow the right burn down interval for that. We don't spend as much time talking about corn burn down programs because you just have generally more flexibility in terms of how you can use 2,4-D and especially dicamba in that situation. And you have some very good combinations there, like for example mesotrione plus atrazine plus a grass herbicide that are just pretty broad spectrum in terms of their burn down. One of the things about a situation like this is a lot of these weeds that aren't necessarily their big drivers are coming to the end of their life cycle anyway. So you have dead nettle and chickweed and a lot of those that are still green, they're flowering, they will die, whereas the maristale, of course, will just keep on going till the end of the season. So you don't have to worry about those quite as much. And a general recommendation here is just if you're still in a glyphosate-based program, just get your glyphosate rates up. Go up to like a 64 ounce of a generic or 44 ounce of a Power Max minimum, and that'll kind of speed things up and give you a better control of things in general. And then when it comes back to maristale and giant ragweed, you have some other options to consider. We really don't, and this is a field that obviously didn't get treated last fall, so we really don't recommend like a glyphosate 2,4-D burn down, even with metribuzin with it, for control of maristale in the spring period if it hasn't received a fall burn down, just because it's typically not effective enough. And of course now what you have is plants that are getting some really good size to them, so that's even going to be more of a concern. So you have to look at, okay, how can I adapt my burn down program to either supplement 2,4-D or replace 2,4-D. One of the things to keep in mind that with maybe one exception, anytime you have a burn down program on a maristale like this that's relying specifically mostly on one herbicide to give you the control, it's going to get more variable. So the glyphosate 2,4-D, you're relying on the 2,4-D, it can't handle plants this size on its own. You get into a sharpen program, so that's maybe one of your first adaptations to think about. Okay, I'm going to go to a glyphosate sharpen program and have some metribuzin in there, or I'm going to use Zidua Pro or whatever. And you still have some variability once you get some size. So, the glyphosate sharpen with metribuzin is going to be a much better burn down on maristale, especially this size, than a glyphosate 2,4-D maristale, 2,4-D metribuzin. But you still have some variability once you get to this size. So, what we look at is how can I make that program either more comprehensive or go to an alternative. Since we did this in 2017, you have a couple more options. I think we covered dicamba resistant beans then in the use of dicamba. Now you have enlist beans, which, the use of 2,4-D and bumping the rate and things like that around the time of planting of the enlist and not having to wait doesn't do a lot for you, but you do have the option to come back with more 2,4-D post-emergence to help finish off some things that maybe the burn down didn't get completely. You have the dicamba bean. And dicamba probably as single ingredients in terms of their effectiveness on maristale. Dicamba is at the top of the list. I think really in a lot of cases plants don't appear dead, but they just never regrow. When they get some size like this, especially in combination with some residual herbicides, you can see some antagonism with the dicamba, so it's not bulletproof. And so your other options with dicamba are, can I add sharpen to it, or put it with Zidua Pro, or do some things like that. And then the other program is glufosinate, where you could use glufosinate on a burn down, and you really have to use it the right way, and I'll cover that here in a second. But so if you look at the adaptation, if you're on a glyphosate 2,4-D burn down, your adaptation is to add sharpen to that, right? Make sure you have some metribuzin in the mix, and then anytime you're using sharpen or Zidua Pro, you've got to use MSO. The other recommendation for all of this, really, even if it's a glyphosate based program being systemic, is you're looking at a messier situation. You want to get your coverage up, you want to get your volume up, make sure you're using the right adjuvants and things like that. So you can go to the glyphosate 2,4-D. You're still going to have to wait 7 days unless you're on the Enlist bean, right? You can add Sharpen to that or Zidua Pro. If you add Sharpen to that and you're still using an Authority or Valor product, keep in mind that, you know, per label you've got a 14-day wait there. So that can be an issue, you know, if you really want to put yourself out 14 days. So if we decide, okay, I'm going to do a glyphosate 2,4-D Sharpen, the other decision to make is, do I need to alternate my residual herbicides? So instead of possibly using like a Valor XLT or a Fierce or an Authority product, I'm going to go, in this case, to like a Canopy plus Metribuzin or a Matador or something like that, where I can put that with the Sharpen and the 2,4-D and not have to go to 14 days. The same issue is there if you're just going with a glyphosate Sharpen without the 2,4-D. You have that same issue. So those are some things to kind of keep in mind for that. If you look at some other alternatives, Gramoxone can have a good fit in this situation. We like the Gramoxone with 2,4-D, with Metribuzin. As far as we're concerned, in a situation that's this big and this diverse, you need all three of those herbicides in there. It's a very good burn down, but it needs that waiting period. And again, you want to use an upper rate of Gramoxone at this point. Make sure your volume's up and things like that. So that can be a good alternative. And then, you know, coming back to Liberty and glufosinate, trying to figure out where they fit in this situation. So there's a couple of different considerations here. One is we get a little bit nervous about glufosinate being effective enough across this range of species in a burn down situation. So you can put Metribuzin with it, and it still really doesn't necessarily get you there. You can put 2,4-D with that and do the 7-day wait, and that kind of gets you closer really to where you need to be. Now, the other combination there that's probably is sort of a break the bank combination is glufosinate plus something that has Sharpen in it plus some Metribuzin, and it, you know, that's a very hot program. It'll fry the whatever out of any typical situation. So that's the next sort of progression there. The other thing that's being done, two things to think about. One is there are some growers and applicators who have put glufosinate with a glyphosate-based program to pick up specifically mare's tail. So you say, okay, I'm using glyphosate with 2,4-D. I'm going to come back, add some glufosinate to that, and that's going to help me with the mare's tail that the 2,4-D struggles with it in that situation. We don't really have much experience with that, but I've talked to some people that have made that work. The other alternative, of course, which I think is difficult to put in place when you start to get late, is a 2-application burn down program where you do something like, you know, glufosinate, glyphosate up front, come back with, you know, something else after you plant but before the beans are up. And again, keep in mind, if you have the dicamba bean or the Enlist bean, in that situation, you've got a lot of flexibility. If you do plant the bean and you happen not to get a burn down on, you still do have the possibility to use 2,4-D or dicamba anywhere in that window on those two beans. You're not going to hurt the bean as long as you're using, obviously, dicamba on the Extend bean and 2,4-D on the Enlist bean. The other thing to talk about here really quickly is cover crops, right? Because we're in a situation where cover crops are getting bigger, and we have a lot of rye, we have barley, we have wheat, and then we have some other cover crops. So glyphosate still has a big role in there. And if you get into some of the legumes and things like that, you do need a growth regulator in there. Ideally, you can find a stinger product going to corn that'll work. Product that has clopyralid in it, but dicamba and 2,4-D have a good fit there. We have picked up in some situations on larger cereal cover crops antagonism of the glyphosate. So that is a place you might consider just going with a high rate of glyphosate first, taking care of the cover, and then coming back with your residual, whatever else you're going to do. In that situation, 2,4-D can actually antagonize the glyphosate. Atrazine can. We had a number of calls a few years ago about Metribuzin antagonizing glyphosate even on cereal rye. Sharpen seems not to. Sharpen actually works really well in that situation with glyphosate. Doesn't seem to antagonize it, so that's something to keep in mind. In our other work, you know, we've had Valor and Authority occasionally antagonize, you know, systemics. You know, when you're going after big species in sort of a really critical window. Now all this is in a newsletter article that we did 2 weeks ago in corn, so it's corn.osu.edu. You go back a couple weeks ago, and the link will be on the screen here. You can go there and also get this story, and don't ever hesitate to contact us if you have any questions.